watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live in Washington. Our top story. The Southport killer is jailed for life. Axel Rudakubana is sentenced to a minimum of 52 years in prison. The judge said it's unlikely he'll ever walk free. It shattered our souls. The families of BB King, Elsie Stancombe and Alice da Silva Aguirre remember their daughters and speak of their sorrow. Also tonight, in an exclusive interview, the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court calls for the arrest of the Taliban's leadership over crimes against women and girls.
It has crossed, we say, all the thresholds of international law and amounts to gender persecution as a crime against humanity detailed in the statute. So I hope people live up. Words are cheap.
Plus, Trump back on the world stage with a message to global leaders gathered in Davos and a contentious reminder to America's neighbor.
We have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. We can't do it. I don't know if it's good for them. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state.
Good evening. Plenty of coverage from here in Washington in a moment, but we're going to start tonight back in the UK with the sentencing of the killer behind the Southport murders. Axel Rudakubana has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 52 years behind bars. The judge said it's unlikely he'll ever be freed. Alice da Silva Aguirre, Elsie Stancombe and BB King were attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance class when they were killed. In court, statements were read out on behalf of bereaved families and victims who survived the attack. Well, each spoke of trauma, loss and love for the three girls. Our chief North of England correspondent Greg Millam was at court and has this report, which I should warn you contains very distressing content that some may find upsetting.
This is Axel Rudakubana on July the 29th on his way to carry out a knife attack on a class full of young girls. At the bus stop, he paces up and down while phoning for a taxi. On that 5-mile journey, he's silent until the very end, when he checks he's at the right address.
Number 34A, yeah.
After he refused to pay, the taxi dash cam records him approaching the door of the dance studio, looking to find his way in. We know what happened next. Inside, 26 girls were enjoying a Taylor Swift dance event at the start of the summer holidays, an event that had sold out. The girls were at a table making friendship bracelets when, without a word, Rudakubana entered and grabbed the child nearest to him. He then moved on to a second and a third, lunging at them. Leanne Lucas, who was running the class that day, said she only realised what was happening when she felt a knife go into her back. Some people left the courtroom because the details of what happened here that day were so graphic. The court was played CCTV footage in which the screams of children can be heard. Leanne Lucas is seen trying to usher them to safety. One child tries to leave the building, but is pulled back in by Rudakubana. She was one of the injured. Deanna Here, KC, said the injuries sustained by two of the children who died could only be described as sadistic in nature. BB King, Elsie Stancombe and Alice Aguirre died in the attack. 8 other girls were injured. The court heard Rudakubana's only intention that day was to kill. After he was arrested, he told police, "It's a good thing those children are dead. I'm so glad. I'm so happy." Among the weapons at his home, police found a second knife, identical to the one used in the attack. They also found evidence of his obsession with violence. In the dock, Rudakubana began shouting that he was ill and needed to see a paramedic, with the families of the victims listening in court. When he refused to stop, the judge ordered him to be removed. We then heard from some of those whose lives have been changed by the events of that day, including one of the girls who was injured. "The beginning of my nightmare," she said, "started when I saw you. I thought you were playing a joke. I saw you in your green hoodie and face mask. The thing I remember most about you is your eyes. You looked possessed. You didn't look human." Leanne Lucas also addressed the court.
I cannot give myself compassion or accept praise, as how can I live knowing I survived when children died? The trauma of being both a victim and a witness has been horrendous. The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey.
There was a statement from the parents of Alice.
Alice was always a very kind girl who valued equality and fairness at the core. A world of possibilities awaited her, a best friend anyone could ask for. We were so lucky and privileged to have her. Every day felt like a gift. In a matter of minutes, our worlds were shattered and turned upside down by the devastating attack on our Alice. A pin drop that changed our lives forever. We kept our hopes up every second during Alice's 14-hour fight, but once she'd lost a fight, we lost our lives. Everything stopped still, and we froze in time and space. Our life went with her. He took us too.
And from Elsie's mum.
You deliberately chose that place, fully aware that there would be no parents present, fully aware that girls were vulnerable and unable to protect themselves. We were robbed of the opportunity to protect our girls. What you did was not only cruel and pure evil, it was the act of a coward.
Ruda Cabana wasn't in court to hear any of that, or the judge sentence him.
The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Ruda Cabana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion. However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest. I'm now going to sentence Axel Ruda Cabana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already.
Police say they've never established why Ruda Cabana chose that venue, those girls, as his target.
He's just the most despicable young person who's committed the most vile and violent acts that are going to have an impact on the victims and their families for the rest of their lives. Words almost fail to describe him in terms of just what a despicable person he is.
The judge said it is highly unlikely Ruda Cabana will ever be released, but so many questions remain, and all of it has come too late for the so many lives altered and the young lives lost. Greg Milam, Sky News, Southport.
And Greg joins us live now from Southport. And Greg, just give us a sense of how the community is reacting tonight.
Well, I think there's relief, certainly, that this trial is over, that we didn't have to sit through 4 weeks of evidence, although, of course, we heard a lot of what we would have heard in that trial today, that very graphic evidence. I think they're glad that's over and that this town in some ways can move on. But when you think about the evidence we heard, those victim impact statements in particular, you get a real sense of the scale of how this affected the town. Of course, those 3 young girls who died, but those who were injured and their families, those who witnessed it, who weren't injured, but who were there and witnessed what happened, and their families, those who helped that day on the street. A huge number of people impacted by what happened that day who are still being impacted and will continue to be so for a while. Elsie's family actually tonight has welcomed the public inquiry, but they've thanked all of those who helped throughout what's happened to them from July moving forward to today, and talking about how wrong it is that someone who's grown up in our society, they said, could commit such an unspeakable act of hatred, and saying it's right and proper that will be examined in that public inquiry. John Hayes, who was one of the adults who was injured, who tried to stop Ruda Cabana that day, has said that public inquiry has come too late. As he said, he's still got the wound in his leg, and those 3 young girls won't come back. They won't be brought back by any public inquiry. He thinks it's come too late, but I think that is the focus for so many people in Southport, are those families, and particularly the families of those 3 young girls who lost their lives that day.
Greg, thank you so much for your reporting there. Now, let's go to my exclusive interview with the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. Karim Khan's job is to bring war criminals to account. 125 countries are signed up to the ICC, and when it issues an arrest warrant, member states are expected to help the subject to justice. The ICC's most high-profile recent case came just a few months ago when it issued arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Further warrants were issued for the leadership of Hamas. The accusation was that Netanyahu's government used starvation as a method of war in Gaza, along with directing attacks on civilians. Israel's government vehemently denies all of those claims, but that's not the ICC's only challenge. Some member states, like France, say the warrant doesn't apply because Israel isn't a member state. So you'd be forgiven for asking, what's the point? Does the ICC lack teeth? Well, today it issued more warrants for leaders of the Taliban. The groups accused of crimes against humanity on the basis of gender and the repression of women and children. Human rights groups welcomed the move, but will it change anything on the ground? Karim Khan told me in an exclusive interview about his efforts to hold the Taliban to account. Have a listen.
The applications that we have filed today are laser focused on one charge, really, in relation to the individuals. It's the crime against humanity of gender persecution, contrary to Article 71H of the Rome Statute. We say that the overwhelming evidence that we've seen, so much of it is in the public domain, so much of it is clearly it is known to Afghan girls and women who live under those pernicious circumstances, constitute severe deprivations of fundamental human rights contrary to international law. This isn't some acceptable choice from a menu of options that states can choose from. This isn't about religious autonomy of doctrinal beliefs of Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or anything else for that matter. This has crossed every threshold in which women can neither be seen nor heard. Women can't go to university. Girls don't have an opportunity to go to school above class 6. Champions of education, including men, who believe that their daughters, girls in general, should have an opportunity to be armed with enlightenment.
Obviously, Afghanistan used to be a signatory to the ICC. I don't think the Taliban would recognize the court and therefore would probably ignore this arrest warrant that you're seeking. Is there any mechanism, though, to enforce this? Because the sorts of countries that perhaps these Taliban leaders would be traveling to, say Pakistan, they too are not a signatory of this court.
Well, it's a great question. The Taliban have been in power for a while. As a matter of international law, they have not withdrawn from the Rome Statute. They have international law obligations. The issue of enforcement is another matter. Our job is to look at the evidence. We have jurisdiction. The international law obligations are clear. And I think it's important for us not only to apply the law, but to realize that there are millions of girls and women and also men in Afghanistan that want equality, that want to be able to have hope, that want to be able to have dreams. And if we don't apply the law equally, it makes things even worse because they are seen by us today. They will be seen by the judges of the International Criminal Court, and hopefully their voices and their dreams will be heard.
What is your message then to those member states?
Firstly, fulfill international obligations. We are in it's a stormy season. I can see you're well wrapped up in Washington, D.C. It's quite overcast here in The Hague as well. And internationally, we are waiting for the green shoots of spring. And what it requires us to get through to that springtime, where we can see the daffodils and the tulips in Holland, is for states to protect what they say they value, which is the right of every individual to autonomy, to choice. How is it right that a woman is forced, not as a matter of choice, that simply because she's 20 years of age, she's forced to get married? How is it right that a widow under 35 is compelled at a time of somebody else's choosing, a decree to get remarried, as opposed to when she wishes to get married again if she does, or at the time when she feels emotionally able to have that connection to get married? These are matters that cannot be imposed. A straitjacket cannot be imposed under the rubric of any ideology, and cumulatively it is so profound that it has crossed, we say, all the thresholds of international law and amounts to gender persecution as a crime against humanity detailed in the statute. So I hope people live up. Words are cheap. This is the time around the world, in Afghanistan and in other situations, where people are looking at the gap between the promise of a rules-based system, the promise of international law, and the reality where far too often international law is a transactional commodity that can be airbrushed out when it's inconvenient, and it can be force-fed when it aligns with national interest. And that current playbook is leading the world to more war, more conflict, less harmony. And I think we need people to have the wisdom, state parties first and foremost, but also other states, to realize that the law is not their enemy. The law is part of the architecture, along with education, along with empowerment, along with healthcare, to allow us to live together in harmony, or at least less conflict.
You just mentioned me being here in Washington, D.C. Of course, over the last few days, we saw Donald Trump inaugurated. I want to turn your attention now to another issue of importance here in the United States. And I want to talk about those arrest warrants that were issued by the court to the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant. The House of Representatives here have voted to sanction the ICC. The Senate is likely to do the same thing. Just your reaction to that?
And of course, the judges of the International Criminal Court also issued a warrant in relation to the Hamas individual Daif. In terms of the options of sovereign states, states have responsibilities to decide what is ethical, what is consistent with the national values, and what is consistent with what they've been saying in other situations. And I always hope, I have great respect for the United States of America and the better angels of ourselves, the best part of the United States, from Jackson, from the Constitution, Jackson, the chief prosecutor of Nuremberg, is a country where individuals have rights and the law must play its part, and we don't sanction judges who are trying to apply the law, or staff members who are serving the cause of humanity to the best of their abilities. It really, there are real problem actors out there in terms of terrorists, in terms of people committing massive crimes. And I hope common sense prevails.
Well, you've said that you hope that judges aren't sanctioned, but just this week, President Trump signed executive orders allowing for that to happen in the future, including sanctions that you could potentially face. How do you react to that and the possibility of sanctions on you?
Well, the way I look at it is this: prosecutors come and go. We're ships that pass in the night. Judges have terms, they come and go. The important thing to remember is that this court and the building that your viewers see behind me was created because there was a realization after Nuremberg, and a realization today, that humanity and science can take us to the stars, but we can also destroy ourselves. And so there's a fundamental choice. Are we trying to be constrained by something? And I think in terms of the best of the United States, I hope common sense and principle prevails.
I mean, the United States would argue that this issue around Israel is beyond your mandate. That is what they're saying. I just want you to respond to that, because their concern is you go after Israel today, could you go after US troops tomorrow? And they're talking specifically about jurisdiction when it comes to this.
Yes, we don't go after anybody. We follow the law. We have, and the judges of the ICC decided before I was elected, that we had jurisdiction in the Palestine state case. Those states accepted Palestine as a state party. This is the first point. Secondly, even the United States accepted, and many of them applauded, the exercise of jurisdiction in the Ukraine situation, even though warrants were issued by the judges of the ICC in relation to the head of state of a non-state party, indeed a permanent member of the Security Council, namely President Putin and Madam Lvova-Belova. And we have to simply follow the law. The law says, under the Rome Statute, we have jurisdiction. There's always the options of complementarity. They have not been taken in the case of Israel. We are here as a court of last resort. And is one really seriously arguing that the hostages in Israel have no recourse when they're being held in Palestine? Or is somebody seriously arguing that a baby in Gaza or hospitals in Gaza are undeserving of protection under the Geneva Conventions? We're not in the Wild West. We're not in the Wild West. We're in a world, at least, that says we are governed by the rule of law.
Are you concerned then when states like France, for example, say, well, this doesn't apply to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, states ultimately have an obligation to apply the law, and there's a difference between what the executive says and what the judges of different national jurisdictions say are the legal requirements under international law, including under national law that implements international law obligations. So I think one needs to have a very calm approach. We have our judges at the International Criminal Court, including French judges. There are French judges in France, of course, and let's see what the judges of those national courts and also of the International Criminal Court say. So far, they've spoken very clearly. We have jurisdiction. The evidence exists in terms of the issuance of warrants. There are international law obligations. And then it's for states to decide to apply their law or to make the arguments that they want. And we have judges here who can decide those arguments. And as a lawyer, that's my best advice always. If you have an argument, if you say there's no jurisdiction, argue before the court. Israel has filed applications before the International Criminal Court. Any state may put forward submissions, and they have. And let's follow the rule of law and accept the outcome.
I don't want to labour this point too much, but just on Donald Trump, issuing this executive order to sanction the court, are you concerned, though, that this sets a sort of precedence and this could impact the future of the court and the future existence of the court?
Well, what President Trump actually has done so far is simply revoke the President Biden's executive order, which revoked President Trump's earlier imposition of sanctions on the International Criminal Court. We'll have to wait and see if another executive order is signed or if there are other bills passed by Congress, and see what the contours of those laws are. And we must respond, accordingly. But we're servants. We endeavour to be, the judges, my staff, servants of something bigger than ourselves, which is the rule of law. And there are big powers out there that have their responsibilities to do what they think is right, not only what is expedient.
Are you worried about this accusation that the court has been weaponized or politicized?
Well, I think it's bunkum. If you look of the history of the ICC, it was accused of being focused a lot on Africa. We have investigations in Venezuela. We have investigations in Ukraine and warrants in Ukraine. We have, of course, Palestine and Israel. We have Georgia. We have, of course, Sudan and Libya. Look at the Philippines. Myanmar, we applied in terms of Myanmar, Bangladesh for warrants. Today in Afghanistan. I don't think it's been a weaponization. I think it's trying to apply the law equally, realizing whatever one's color of one's skin, whatever one's passport, whatever one's, whichever continent of the world one lives in, certain conduct, namely genocide, war crimes or crimes against humanity cannot be condoned. They constitute breaches of the Geneva Convention, they constitute breaches of customary international law, and they constitute breaches of the Rome Statute. And one can't close one's eyes to the evidence simply because the application, the fair and equal application of the law, may make one unpopular or a target because of the friendships or alliances of some powerful beasts in the jungle. And in fact, that type of approach is anathema to the equal application of the law. This is why Lady Justice is blind. That's the aspiration, that the law is applied equally. We're not living in a perfect world, I'm not naive, but we're trying to apply the law in an effective, in a fair manner, notwithstanding the consequences that, may be threatened. And I think the victims
Mr. Khan,
expect this of us.
Mr. Khan, I have to ask you about something closer to the home. You face sexual misconduct allegations. I know that there is currently an external investigation, but can I just ask you to respond to those allegations? Because there are some who believe that perhaps you should be stepping down from your position because this investigation is a distraction to all of the things that you've discussed with me today and the work of the court.
Well, I called for the investigation, in fact, and I'm not able to comment further. I've given statements in relation to that. There's an order and an injunction by the President of the Assembly of State Parties. This is a process. I called for an investigation, and really I've got nothing more to add at all on the topic. And, I think that's where I must leave it.
Just briefly, Mr. Khan, I know we've gone over time, but just on Syria, I know you recently were there to meet the de facto leader. Is the court currently looking at holding the previous regime accountable?
We have no jurisdiction as things stand in Syria. We are well aware of the very serious accusations over quite a period of time in relation to Syria. But it was important, I think, to go and to speak to the transitional government, to underline the fact that options existed to build partnerships, to try to improve accountability, to narrow the impunity gap. And we discussed those options, and I think a team will be going back to Damascus in the next short while. The people of Syria have suffered enormously. We're willing to help. We're willing to play our part if we have jurisdiction. If we don't, we can't.
That was the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, speaking to me a little earlier. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live here from Washington. We've got lots more coming up on the program. Another day, another flurry of executive orders from Donald Trump. We'll bring you the details.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change.
We're being crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News at the full story first. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Well, tonight, Donald Trump has been signing another flurry of executive orders on AI, crypto, and even declassifying documents around the assassination of JFK. He's also suggested that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has told him he's ready to strike a peace deal with Russia.
Soldiers are being killed on a daily basis at numbers that we haven't seen in decades. It would be nice to end that war. It's a ridiculous war.
You said that Ukraine's ready to make a deal. Did President Zelensky tell you that?
Yeah, sure. He's ready to negotiate a deal. He'd like to stop. He's somebody that lost a lot of soldiers.
Donald Trump there. Well, let's bring in our David Blevins for more analysis. And David, I mean, the issue around Ukraine was something that Donald Trump has famously said he can resolve within 24 hours. He clearly is starting the process of negotiations and putting out these sorts of hints and remarks about what Volodymyr Zelensky is saying, but also clear messages to Vladimir Putin as well.
Yes, bringing a lot of people, I suppose, into that conversation, suggesting that Volodymyr Zelensky wants a deal, telling an audience in Davos, Switzerland, online earlier today that he's confident that President Putin will also see the merit in a deal, and even in the last few minutes calling on the Chinese government to put pressure on the Russians economically to help bring that about. He's also been speaking about that other trouble spot, the Middle East, saying he's considering sending Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, who helped bring about the deal that saw the hostages released at the weekend and the ceasefire, to Iran next to negotiate better relations with Iran. But of course, all of these comments came at the end of another busy afternoon when he was signing another 5 executive orders in the Oval Office. As you say, one about artificial intelligence, another about cryptocurrency. There was one recognising a Native American tribe in North Carolina. But there were 2 big ones, I think, one particularly bringing us back to thoughts about what happened around the pardoning of those who were involved in the January 6th riot on the Capitol. He's also this afternoon granted pardons to some people who were involved in anti-abortion protests. But I think the headline-grabbing one is that commitment to declassify documents relating to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. We all know that Americans have a morbid fascination with the killing of the 35th president. Many disbelieve that it was carried out by Lee Harvey Oswald, that sole assailant. But Donald Trump, of course, has made this promise before during his first term, and he rode back at the request of the CIA and the FBI, saying for reasons of national security he could not release that information. But again, we're seeing him, I suppose, flirt with conspiracy theorists, the people who, to a very large extent, have put him back into the White House.
David, it's been quite a week, hasn't it? I mean, just, when we were earlier talking about the fact that a week is a short amount of time, but in the world of Donald Trump, we've already seen so much happen in just a few days.
A week is a lifetime, I think, in the politics of Washington, D.C. It's been the most incredible roller coaster of a year, I suppose. The change of candidate from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, then Donald Trump's spectacular comeback, and now Donald Trump keeping his campaign promises to make all of these changes by executive order. And at the stroke of a pen, changing the shape of America and changing the shape of America's relationship with the rest of the world. And all of this, of course, you could, in the midst of all of that, the politics, Yalda, you could miss the fact that each one of these decisions is having huge impact on people's lives. And I think it's going to be some time before we really begin to understand just what Trump 2.0 is going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we are starting to get a bit of a flavour. David, thank you so much. Well, you're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, what we've been talking to Karim Khan about. Can the Taliban be held accountable after those arrest warrants from the ICC? I'll be speaking to the former Vice President of the Afghanistan National Assembly.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Welcome back to Washington. Let's get more details now on those arrest warrants requested by the International Criminal Court for leaders of the Taliban. Well, the ICC has requested warrants for the arrests of the Supreme Leader, Haibatullah Akhundzada, and the Chief Justice, Abdul Hakim Haqqani, saying they bear criminal responsibility for the crime against humanity of persecution on gender grounds. This points to a severe breach of fundamental rights. It includes the right to physical integrity and autonomy, to free movement and expression, to education, to private and family life. The ICC says opposition to the Taliban was and is brutally repressed through the use of crimes including murder, imprisonment, torture, rape and other forms of sexual violence, and forced disappearance and other inhumane acts. Well, joining me now is Fawzi Kufi, former Vice President of the Afghanistan National Assembly. Fawzi John, thank you very much for joining us on the program. First of all, your reaction to these arrest warrants being issued by the ICC, or the ICC prosecutors seeking arrest warrants.
Well, Yalda Jan, I think it's a historic day for women of Afghanistan. As a woman from Kabul was just texting me that it looks as a breeze of a fresh air on their face after 3 suffocating years. Although we know that probably it will take time for these 2 Taliban leaders, but many more of the Taliban leaders to be brought to justice and for justice to be implemented in favor of women of Afghanistan. But this itself is a big news for Afghanistan, for the women, and I think for global justice, because what we are fighting is not only for Afghanistan, it's for global justice.
Well, you're a parliamentarian of the previous regime and government, and of course Afghanistan was a signatory to the ICC. It's unlikely that the Taliban will recognize the ICC or these arrest warrants. So do you think it makes that much of a difference on the ground for Afghan women?
I think it will make a huge impact politically, but also I hope at some point also legally in terms of actual enforcement of the law, the international law. Although the ground for the ICC and ICJ to be active in Afghanistan is fully prepared, because all the evidences, including the UN report, the UN Special Rapporteur, the UN Special Committee on the Situation of Women, the CEDAW reports, all other supplementary reports indicate that what's happening in Afghanistan can amount to crimes against humanity. It's gender persecution, something that the appeal from Chief Prosecutor also indicate that it's crimes against humanity and gender persecution. But also in the format of apartheid, although gender apartheid has not been recognized in the international law, but in the format of the racial apartheid, it is a partition of women for their gender from any kind of progress in their society, which is not even about fundamental rights. It's about their life, because, you know, recently Taliban banned women from attending medical colleges, which can disrupt the health system and eventually affect the women and children's lives. So it's not even about fundamental rights, but it's about women's health and their life, for which the Taliban are accountable. And I think there are all the legal basis that not only, you know, the Taliban leader, their Chief Justice, but I guess also the Minister of Vice and Virtue, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Higher Education, and many other Taliban leaders can be brought to justice.
Yes, and when I spoke to Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, he also indicated that, you know, they would be looking at seeking further arrest warrants for other potential Taliban leaders. Do you think this will put the Taliban on any kind of notice? Because international sanctions, pressure from the United States, Islamic countries, hasn't seemed to change anything on the ground over the course of the last 3 years. No amount of pressure has made the Taliban budge when it has come to, for example, allowing girls to go back to school.
But Yalda John, we have a different view, we have a different perception on this, because I don't think there has been any real pressure exerted on Taliban from anybody. There has been regular engagement of the United States, of the Global South, of EU diplomats with women, with the Taliban. The UN constantly hosts the Taliban's, meetings, international meetings, including the last meeting, which was held in Doha, where based on the Taliban request, women and human rights was not even included, and yet Taliban only sent their spokesperson. The Islamic world, we are expecting more a reaction to challenge the Taliban narrative, because I think their Taliban are creating more Islamophobia, and it's not good for the image of Muslim world, because what the Taliban do under the name of our religion is in contradiction to the religion. Recently there was an Islamic League conference in Pakistan, organized with participation of many Muslim leaders, who also condemn what the Taliban do. So I think there should be more pressure, more political pressure. This is just a first step from ICC. I think there should be more countries who should join ICJ. We should use the international rule and order as a leverage for Taliban to end, to stop their gender persecution, and for us to end the culture of impunity, because over the past 5 decades of war, women of Afghanistan have been used as a weapon of war, as a political tool for different groups, and Taliban actually announced only a full-fledged war against women. I think this is one of the steps. Obviously, the money that goes to Afghanistan, not the humanitarian aid. We support the humanitarian aid because people are living in poverty, and we know that. But the money that goes in cash, that should also be stopped. So the Taliban should be accountable based on the Doha agreement that the United States signed with the Taliban for a political process, because I personally believe without changing the political ecosystem in Afghanistan, things will not change. So this is the beginning of changing that political ecosystem. It sends a strong signal to the Taliban.
Fawzia John, always good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for having me.
This is The World, with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the program, Donald Trump stuns Davos's billionaires with claims tariffs could bring trillions into America's treasury, and that Canada could become a US state.
Saturday, exclusively on Peacock. 2 clubs aim desperately to climb up the Premier League table.
It's a chance for Erling Haaland, just phenomenal.
Manchester City.
And that's a beautiful finish.
Chelsea. This is the Premier League. Saturday, only on Peacock.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there.
What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor.
Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything
I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back to the programme. Well, Donald Trump has been addressing the world's top financiers and leaders virtually at Davos with a very clear message. The US president criticised the EU and tried to tempt more companies to America. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso was listening.
Donald Trump has always been a draw, attracting a crowd in Davos, even for a virtual appearance.
What are you expecting from Mr. Trump? Mr. Kerry?
I have no idea.
Mr. Miliband? Any expectations?
Not yet.
The president beamed in from Washington to addressing a meeting of business and political leaders he's dominated from a distance.
What are you expecting from Mr. Trump, gentlemen?
Who knows? Who knows?
You know, I'm going to pass, thank you. I worked for President Biden.
And what are you expecting?
I have no idea.
I
can't wait to hear.
His message, America first, means Europe is in his sights.
The EU treats us very, very unfairly, very badly. They have a large tax that we know about, and a VAT tax, and it's a very substantial one. They don't take our, essentially don't take our farm products, and they don't take our cars, yet they send cars to us by the millions.
He dangled offers of tax cuts for businesses that move to America and offered hope, but no detail, of peace in Ukraine.
It's so important to get that done. That is an absolute killing field. Millions of soldiers are being killed. Nobody's seen anything like it since World War II. They're laying dead all over the flat field.
What do you think of the president's speech, Madame Lagarde?
Little wonder Europe's leaders, including the boss of the central bank, looked slightly stunned.
This week, Davos has effectively been a live focus group made up of the rich and powerful on Donald Trump's first week in power. Well, they have just heard an expression of total confidence in American might, and he poses a huge challenge to many of them, particularly in Europe.
The UK Trade Secretary, who's been here all week, hopes in a trade war Britain would avoid direct confrontation.
They're very concerned about the deficits in goods the US has with the EU and with China. That's not the case for the US to the UK. So if we take their argument, we can engage with that.
After a week in the Alps spent guessing what Trump's second coming might mean for the global economy, no one can leave in any doubt of the disruption to come.
Well, Paul joins me live now from Davos. And Paul, just watching your piece there, you was talking to people who were saying, you know, really looking forward to hearing what he had to say. How did they react afterwards?
It was a real contrast in mood between perhaps Americans, American businesses, American investors, and the European mood. And the whole theme of this Davos, actually, largely because of the inauguration at the beginning of the week, is that those running American companies with American propositions have been really confident. Sentiment towards the US has been very positive because Donald Trump's threatening to unleash the animal spirits, as they put it here, as he set out in that speech. America first, which means money-making opportunities. Europe, the old order, if you might put it that way, low growth, all the challenges of a high regulation environment have been very pessimistic, and that was only made worse. Brave faces put on by the British Trade Secretary. I spoke to the Norwegian Foreign Minister. Interesting country, Norway, outside the EU, sells a lot of energy. He said, at least we know where we stand now. There's a huge challenge, And we should make no mistake, we're going to have to make it easier to do business in Europe.
Yeah, and you know, you were talking there about they were sort of taking it all in and the brave faces. Was there anything in particular that they sort of really sat up and sort of thought, okay, I can't believe he's saying that?
I think it was, for me, it was the brazenness of it. Donald Trump was given some questions from CEOs. One of them, one of his neighbours in Mar-a-Lago, runs one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, and he teed up Donald Trump. He said, businesses here telling me how tough it is to do business in Europe because of regulation. What do you make of that, Mr. President? And that opened up this broadside on European business, the call to companies to come to America. He did get a laugh when he said, just to rub it in, that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia has offered $600 million of investment. He said, I'm going to get them to round it up to $1 trillion. Europe simply can't compete against that. Of course, the reality of what Mr. Trump delivers may well be different. So they leave Davos now knowing that there is a potential trade war coming, but will it actually emerge?
Paul, thank you so much. Well, that's it from the team and me here in Washington. We've been here all week covering all the issues, and we will continue to do so. But for now, good night.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war? Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump, it would appear, is about to learn his fate. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. Sky News, get the full story first. Do you fear a fourth indictment?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.